here. I haven't seen Ralph this morning. Is he in the party? So cheeky. Okay, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Brilliant. My name is the Spencerville Residents Association. In the September earthquake, we were really badly affected out at there. And Hayters Road, which is the main road down to the beach and the camping ground, was really badly affected. All the manholes are sort of popped. Our judder bars don't exist now, and we have judder bars where we never used to. And Skirt have done an appraisal of that and said that it is not earthquake damage and they aren't going to fix it. We don't accept that. Any resident that's lived out in Spencerville would be able to tell you that it is purely earthquake damage. So we basically just want that reviewed again because it is earthquake damage and it needs to be repaired. Yeah, I've lived there all my life and I can vouch that it definitely is earthquake damage. Yeah. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Cheers. Oh. Right.
Those sticking up manholes, which I cycle over, did they used to stick up before the earthquake?
No.
No.
No, they used to be flat. And we used to have 3 actual built judder bumps on the way down, and now some of them are completely flat, and then we've got mounds where they used to be and holes, and it floods all the time, and yeah, it's just terrible. And the fact that it's the campground's now going to be run by the council, we think that it would be in your best interest to repair the road and have it looking great. Yeah.
The campground, does that make the road incredibly busier in the summer or just a little bit busier or what?
Yeah, summertime is really, really busy. Obviously, that's the only access to the beach, and the beach is used a huge amount, and the surf club are currently looking at building a bridge. It will again be used even more, I'd imagine.
Thanks for coming in too. It's good to hear from you actually living there. When it came back that it was not earthquake damage, did anyone go back and then say, well, what do you base that on, or how are you,
I haven't had that information fed back to me.
Right. So they didn't say this is historic and this is why, or these are pictures of it before. It was just a straight out, this is historical, this is before.
We've just been told that it wasn't earthquake damage.
Okay, thank you.
So, thank you very much. No worries. Thanks.
Sure. Okay, we'll go for that. Thank you. So I'm Jonathan Hunt. I've worked in IT for over 25 years. I'm with Isaac Freeman, who's got 20 years experience, and Dave Lane with 20 years experience, and Keir as well. I want to suggest to you that secure online voting is a tantalising mirage. Trial is a misleading term. This is not a trial. The outcome is for real. This is a pilot deployment with real-life consequences. The prospect of increased turnout is not supported by the evidence. Even Lawrence Yule of Local Government New Zealand is quoted as saying that international evidence would suggest it doesn't improve voter turnout. Online voting is not equivalent to online banking. Voting is occasional, not a constant process like banking transactions. Online banking is not anonymous, whereas voting is intended to preserve the secret ballot. The challenge is that security and anonymity are at odds. Fraud in online banking can often be resolved with minimal impact on individuals or even corporations, whereas fraud on an online election could bring the entire process into question. Even online banking is regularly compromised, and banks have entire teams devoted to preventing fraud. And just this morning I heard about a hack that I wasn't aware of that occurred earlier in 2015 that affected 30 banks around the world. And in 2010, late Kiwi Barnaby Jack demonstrated tricking an ATM into spitting out all of its cash remotely. Online voting brings new inherent risks compared to postal voting, including hacking, phishing, that's with a PH, and DDoS, distributed denial of service. And any such attacks can be initiated from anywhere in the world. Security expert Bruce Schneier quoted from 2001, "Building a secure internet-based voting system is a very hard problem, harder than all the other computer security problems we have attempted and failed at. I believe that the risks to democracy are too great to attempt it." Security academic J. Alex Haldeman in 2012, so only a few years ago, "Securing internet voting in practice will require significant fundamental advances in computer security, and we urge internet voting proponents to reconsider deployment until and unless major breakthroughs are achieved." I ask you here today, what major breakthroughs are you aware of in computer security that make this pilot viable? This is not a business as usual IT procurement. The time frame is aggressive. The staff report shows no evidence of the substantial risks being acknowledged or mitigated. This is uncharted territory for New Zealand, and overseas experiences have generally been disastrous. Australia, iVote, a significant security issue discovered the last time it was deployed. Canada, successful but minimal impact on turnout, and there's been claims of security issues. Estonia, seen as successful but severely critiqued by independent researchers. France, fake votes demonstrated. Netherlands, they've banned internet voting outright. Norway, abandoned online voting. Spain, discontinued. Not sure about Switzerland. UK, discontinued. Washington, DC, that was a genuine trial without a politically binding outcome. It was hacked within 48 hours and discontinued. West Virginia, not sure. So that's at least 6 of the 12 jurisdictions mentioned in the Working Party report have all abandoned online voting. As councillors, you have responsibilities. An abundance of caution is necessary when changing processes affecting democracy. Council legitimacy is contingent on community confidence in the electoral process. Online voting changes who can understand and scrutinise the vote counting process and removes it from community ownership and oversight. Christchurch people have lost democracy in ECAN. Let's not lose it here. Australia's own Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters concluded last year Australia is not in a position to introduce any large-scale system of electronic voting in the near future without catastrophically compromising our electoral integrity. I dispute the confirmation of statutory compliance claim in the agenda that the report contains adequate consideration of the views and preferences of affected and interested persons, bearing in mind any proposed or previous community engagement. If this is the sum total of community engagement, then it's not enough. And I note that Cabinet intended that the public be consulted before deciding to participate in any trial. We recommend that the Christchurch City Council decline to participate in the online voting trial. Thank you for hearing us.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. You said that this trial is not a trial. What do you mean?
Well, because it has a politically binding outcome. So it's a first-time real-life deployment. If it was a true trial, it would be a test case, and people could vote and see how it works, and the outcome wouldn't be a binding thing.
I think when Lawrence Ewell mentioned, that the online voting doesn't improve outcomes, would it be fair to say that he was meaning on its own? I don't think it's ever been suggested that online voting is a silver bullet to improve engagement and numbers voting. It is, however, a tool in the toolbox. Would you agree with that?
Well, the question is, if it's not going to increase online voting, if it's not going to increase participation, why are we doing it?
No, on its own. So
Well, then it's just a convenience. You're introducing a convenience for voters who are already committed to voting, and you're introducing massive risks alongside that convenience.
And
I don't think you follow
can I
what
just
I'm
add
saying.
on quickly? The other thing is this is very expensive. It's 200,000. I mean, to you saying that's been in use, that's a new skate park. If it doesn't improve turnout, you could put that money into other measures that have been proven to improve turnout, which would be, again, it's part of a toolbox, and there's other measures which would have a better return for that spend. Well, for instance, one thing we know is that there's a substantial political science literature on how to improve turnout, and it involves things like community-based direct contact with voters. It involves things like, mail-outs, improving people's knowledge of the process, that kind of community engagement to build them deeper into the process, as opposed to sort of superficial online convenience.
We would certainly encourage the use of online technologies to make information about the vote more available and to increase the ability for people to become informed and engaged through that. And I would certainly agree that we should be focusing on community-based enticements. So, for example, hui in regards to each election, that get people together to discuss it as a community and turn this into something that becomes a community exercise where the community actually has an opportunity to get together and use some of that funding perhaps instead to build on community level engagement rather than building something as esoteric as an online voting system.
I see the government turned down Auckland Council's request to pursue online voting, ostensibly because the number of electors was seen to be too big, whatever too big is, yet we know software or whatever has great capabilities. Do you suspect there were some other reasons that sat behind
Well,
that?
I can't speak to those reasons, but I did hear on Radio New Zealand this morning that if this pilot goes ahead, it'll be the biggest number of people voting online that's happened. So if that's the case,
Worldwide.
this is insanely ambitious and aggressive, and I just don't think the technology is ready.
We know, I mean, we're all software developers. Well, at least 3 of us are software developers, commercial software developers, and the time frame that has been proposed for this is absurd. It can't, I don't think it could be done in a way that would be, I don't think it could be done in a way that would meet the security requirements, the very good security requirements by and large, which were listed in the DIA's report for online voting. I don't believe that those could be achieved in the time frame available in a way that's competent.
And thank you for the time you've taken to raise your concerns and your views. If you were going to trial an online voting system, and given that you've said that obviously doing it as part of the real election wouldn't be appropriate, is there any other ways in which you think you could trial online voting to see what sort of impact it had? And if so, what would they be?
Well, I'm not going to come up with a solution right here, right now, but the issue you face is not just is the centralised system that's tallying the vote secure. Now, as soon as you go to online voting, you're bringing every consumer device, every router in people's homes, every smartphone, every computer, and we already know that over 30% of home PCs are infected with malware. So you've got to secure the entire system, and that includes people's personal devices, if you want to regard the election as being a secure process. And I'm not hearing anybody even starting to talk about that.
It's not a tractable problem. The reason that we're sitting here today is because we believe that the non-technical decision makers who are deciding to proceed with online voting, largely in my experience, on the basis that we do online banking. We've already explained that that's a flawed comparison, that there is no relationship between the security of online banking and the security of online voting. There's no way to make an extrapolate security from one to the other, so just don't even consider that. The concern is that the non-technical people who think that this should be easy have this tremendous faith in engineers to come up with a technical solution. And we're telling you, as engineers, that there is no technical solution.
My question is, you've listed 10 countries and two of the Washington, West Virginia, and the United States, where the pilots were abandoned. And however, I'm taking it from this that, in fact, because they were abandoned, or in that process, that people who had voted or didn't get their vote recorded or whatever, in effect, became disenfranchised. And this happened in more than 10 countries. Is that this lead to people being disenfranchised?
There's been different reasons in the different countries and different jurisdictions as to why they were abandoned, but we know that in a number of cases, there were real votes that were lost. There was a case in Australia recently where there's approximately 66,000 votes came in before they discovered a major vulnerability. It was
New South Wales.
New South Wales.
By the way, this morning on Radio New Zealand, if any of you heard the report, there was a suggestion from the people who run the online voting system here that you are talking about dealing with in your meeting agenda, who suggested that the number of votes was quite small in New South Wales. However, I think that was a great minimization of 66,000 votes being available to be changed at the time that the vulnerability was discovered in the New South Wales election.
Yes, but we know how close some of these elections can be.
I'd like to also very quickly point out that even in countries where ostensibly online voting has been successful, like Estonia, where online voting is proceeding, despite strong technical recommendations that they cease using online voting, only 25% of voters actually use the online voting system, despite the fact that potentially everyone in the country who voted could have. So that demonstrates that even in the places where it's ostensibly successful, the actual rejection of that system is at least 75% of voters.
Thanks for coming in. Just note you guys talked about the correlation between online banking and online voting. And obviously online banking, the compromising of online banking has got a huge financial gain for the person who actually hacks into it. Is there actually statistics on actually how many accounts get hacked into internationally into online banking?
I don't have those numbers, but it's off the top of my head, I believe sort of 2 to 3% of transactions are often checked. Often it's sort of commercially sensitive as to how many of those involve actual fraud.
Keep in mind that every bank stands to lose its customer base if it actually admits
Exactly
there's a strong
So in other words, the
incentive not
banking
to
industry will
disclose
not tell us exactly how much they are losing.
That's right.
Because of the ongoing issues.
It's probably substantially more than what they report.
So we do know that fraud happens, but we also know that there's an industry backing to deal with that, to reimburse people, to reverse transactions. There's a whole structure of systems to make that possible.
We need to be very conscious of the commercial incentives throughout this process.
One question, okay. If, because you particularly emphasize this time is not the kind of the real trial. Actually, it's all the votes to be counted, But if this time is a real trial, and also through this trial, we detect or find out all the potential problem, and we try to improve all those IT, maybe the system, etc. If we start from the 2019, the local government, is possible or not, based on your understanding?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, well, one of the dangers of this is that this is not a static situation. So even if there was a pilot and it was regarded as successful, it's a moving target. There's constantly new threats being developed. The bad guys and the hackers aren't standing still, and this is a very fluid situation. And in the past year, there's been some really substantial vulnerabilities found in really fundamental layers of the internet, things like SSH and so on, that everybody have been relying on for years and years, and yet here we find that there's been a substantial vulnerability. So this is not a static situation. It's never a one-off thing that this is given the tick and then you can relax. As soon as you put it out
Two
there,
additional considerations. If we run a pilot which is not binding, the incentive on people to attempt to compromise it is minimal. Because why would you reveal your hand? Why would you? Why would you reveal your hand if you have potential insight into how to exploit a vulnerability in a computer system if it's just a trial? Ultimately, the only way you can prove that your system is secure, and I actually would argue you cannot prove it because you cannot. by definition, you cannot detect vulnerabilities which circumvent your security systems. I would say that the only way that you can determine whether it's secure is by having a high-stakes election that would then provide a major incentive for someone to compromise the results. But I would argue that in most cases, you cannot actually determine whether your system has been compromised. That is the huge danger.
So the short answer is we don't know. We don't know for 2019.
But no one knows.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone knows. And anyone who claims that they do, I would argue you should look at their vested interests.
Oh, I was just going to say, after the Washington DC trial was hacked, that hack wasn't detected until they added a song that played after every vote was cast, and then the officials realised that the system had been compromised.
Thank you.
It was the Michigan University marching
That's
song.
right. Yeah.
Just their university.
Yes.
Thank you very, very much indeed. That's been incredibly helpful, and thank you for coming along and telling that.
Thank you for hearing us.
Okay,